Growing up, I always knew I was living in my younger sister Emma's shadow. While I spent my evenings buried in textbooks and helping with household chores, Emma was out with friends, coming home whenever she pleased, with our parents greeting her with warm smiles instead of lectures. The difference in how we were treated wasn't subtle. It was glaringly obvious to everyone except our parents, who seemed genuinely blind to their favoritism. Emma was everything I wasn't: outgoing, charismatic, and effortlessly beautiful. She had this natural ability to charm everyone around her, including our parents, teachers, and pretty much anyone who crossed her path. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one, the daughter who never caused trouble, always got good grades, and never asked for anything. Perhaps that was my mistake. By being so self-sufficient, I inadvertently made it easier for our parents to focus all their attention on Emma's drama-filled life. Hey everyone, if you're finding this story as shocking as I still find it myself, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The pattern started early in our childhood. When Emma would break something valuable, like our grandmother's antique vase, our parents would brush it off as an accident, and sometimes even blame me for not watching her carefully enough. When I accidentally spilled juice on the carpet once, I was lectured for an hour about being more careful and had to clean the entire living room as punishment. This double standard became the norm in our household. Emma seemed to take pleasure in getting me into trouble. She would borrow my clothes without asking, often returning them stained or damaged, and when I complained, our parents would tell me I was being selfish and should share with my sister. She would eat the last of my favorite snacks that I had been saving, knowing full well they were mine, and when I got upset, I was told I was being petty over just food. But the real torture began when we both hit our teenage years. Emma discovered that she could use her charm and our parents' favoritism to make my life miserable in more sophisticated ways. She would volunteer me for babysitting her friends, younger siblings, without asking me first, telling our parents I had already agreed. When I tried to back out, I looked like the unreliable one. She would promise our parents she would help with major family events or holidays, then conveniently develop mysterious illnesses or urgent social commitments at the last minute, leaving me to handle everything alone. The worst part wasn't even the extra work. It was watching our parents' reaction. They never seemed to notice the pattern. Emma's last-minute cancellations were always met with sympathy and understanding, while my complaints about being overwhelmed were dismissed as me being dramatic or not managing my time properly. School became no refuge either. Emma was 2 years younger but somehow managed to make friends with people in my grade. She would spread little stories about me, nothing outright malicious, just enough to paint me as the uptight, boring older sister. She had a talent for making these comments sound like loving concern. "I'm just worried about her," she would say to my classmates. "She studies so much, I don't think she knows how to have fun." The social isolation was devastating during those crucial high school years. While Emma was invited to parties and had boys calling the house constantly, I spent most weekends alone in my room. Our parents saw this as validation of their belief that Emma was the social, well-adjusted daughter, while I was just naturally antisocial. Emma's manipulation skills grew more sophisticated as we got older. She learned how to time her requests perfectly, asking our parents for expensive items or permissions right after I had asked for something much smaller. Somehow, my modest request would be denied, while her extravagant one would be approved. She got a car for her 16th birthday, while I had to take the bus until I could buy my own with money from my part-time job. The psychological impact of living with this constant inequality was profound. I began to question my own worth and wonder if maybe our parents saw something in me that I couldn't see, some fundamental flaw that made me less deserving of love and attention. I threw myself into academics and extracurricular activities, hoping that if I just achieved enough, worked hard enough, proved myself enough, I might finally earn the same level of affection Emma received simply by existing. But no matter what I accomplished, honor roll, scholarship offers, leadership positions. The praise was always brief and quickly overshadowed by whatever Emma was doing. When I was accepted to a prestigious university with a partial scholarship, the dinner conversation somehow shifted to Emma's recent breakup and how we all needed to support her through this difficult time. Looking back now, I can see that Emma wasn't just a spoiled younger sister. She was actively working to maintain her position as the family favorite by ensuring I remained in the background. Every time I started to gain our parents' attention or approval, she would create some crisis or achievement that would redirect their focus back to her. It was a calculated campaign that lasted years, and I was too naive to see it for what it was until much later. The foundation was being laid for what would eventually become the most devastating betrayal of my life, though I had no idea at the time just how far Emma would be willing to go to maintain her position as the golden child. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school, and it involved something that should have been one of my proudest moments. I had been working for months on a science fair project about renewable energy solutions, spending countless hours in our garage building a working model of a solar-powered water purification system. The project was my ticket to a full scholarship at my dream university, and I had been selected as one of the top 3 finalists in the state competition. The night before the finals, I was in the garage, making final adjustments when Emma wandered in. She seemed unusually interested in my work, asking detailed questions about how everything functioned. I was so excited to finally have her attention and approval that I enthusiastically explained every component. She even helped me load everything into our dad's truck, which I thought was incredibly sweet of her. The next morning, I woke up to find my project completely destroyed. Someone had poured water all over the electrical components and knocked over the display boards. Everything was ruined beyond repair. I was devastated. Months of work destroyed just hours before the most important presentation of my life. When I told our parents what happened, they were sympathetic but seemed to assume it was some kind of accident or perhaps a break-in. Emma, of course, was full of comfort and support. She hugged me while I cried and even offered to help me try to salvage something for the presentation. Her kindness felt genuine, and I was grateful to have my sister's support during such a crushing disappointment. I never suspected her involvement, even when I noticed she seemed remarkably well rested for someone who claimed to have stayed up late helping me the night before. It wasn't until years later that I would discover the truth. During a particularly heated argument in college, Emma let it slip that she had sabotaged my project because she was tired of hearing our parents talk about how proud they were of me. She laughed as she told me, saying I should have seen my face when I found everything destroyed. The casual cruelty in her voice as she described watching me cry that morning was something I'll never forget, but at the time, I had no idea. I simply picked up the pieces, literally and figuratively, and focused on my backup plan. Even without the scholarship, I was determined to go to university. I took out student loans, worked 2 part-time jobs, and slowly built my independence. College became my escape, the first place where I could be myself without Emma's shadow looming over everything. University life was liberating in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time, I was judged on my own merits. I made friends who knew nothing about my family dynamics, joined study groups where my contributions were valued, and even started dating. It felt like emerging from a fog I hadn't realized I'd been living in. During my sophomore year, I met Michael at a campus coffee shop. He was a year ahead of me, studying business, with the kind of steady, reliable personality that I found incredibly attractive after years of dealing with Emma's unpredictable chaos. Michael was everything I had been looking for without realizing it: kind, supportive, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally. Michael would walk me to classes, study with me in the library, and listen patiently when I talked about my family situation. He was the first person who validated my feelings about Emma's treatment of me. helping me understand that the favoritism I had experienced wasn't normal or acceptable. Michael came from a close-knit family where siblings actually supported each other, and he was shocked when I told him some of the stories from my childhood. His perspective helped me realize just how dysfunctional my family dynamics really were. Through his eyes, I began to see that I wasn't the problem. I had simply been the scapegoat in a family system that needed someone to blame for their dysfunction. We got engaged during my senior year, and I was nervous about introducing Michael to my family. The visit went about as well as I expected. Emma immediately turned on her charm, flirting shamelessly with my fiancé and monopolizing conversations. She told embarrassing stories about my childhood, painting me as an awkward, antisocial bookworm while positioning herself as the fun, adventurous sister. Michael saw right through her act, which was both validating and concerning. After the visit, he gently pointed out how differently our parents treated Emma and me, and how Emma seemed to deliberately undermine me in subtle ways. Having someone else witness and acknowledge the dynamics I'd lived with for years was both healing and painful. Our wedding was small, but beautiful. Emma played the role of supportive sister perfectly, giving a touching maid of honor speech about how proud she was of me and how perfect Michael and I were together. At the time, I thought maybe we had finally reached a point where we could have a healthy adult relationship. I was hopeful that marriage would help me establish stronger boundaries and that distance would help our relationship improve. Michael and I settled into married life in a small apartment near his work. Those first few years were the happiest of my life. I had my own little family, a career I loved, and for the first time I felt truly valued and appreciated. Michael's unwavering support helped me build confidence I never knew I was capable of having. We stayed in regular contact with both our families, but I was grateful for the physical distance. Emma would call occasionally, usually when she needed something or wanted to complain about our parents or her latest boyfriend. These conversations were exhausting, but they felt manageable when I could hang up and return to my peaceful life with Michael. The warning signs were there, though I didn't recognize them at the time. Emma's calls became more frequent, and she started asking more detailed questions about my life, where we lived, what Michael's schedule was like, how happy we were together. She seemed particularly interested in any problems or disagreements Michael and I might have, always ready with advice about how marriage was more complicated than people realized. She also started visiting more often, sometimes showing up unannounced when she claimed to be in the area. Michael was always polite and welcoming, though he privately told me he found her behavior strange. Looking back, I can see that Emma was carefully studying our relationship, looking for weaknesses she could exploit. But at the time, I was just happy that my sister seemed interested in being part of my life in a positive way. After years of feeling like the black sheep of the family, having Emma's attention and apparent approval felt like a gift. I had no idea she was actually gathering intelligence for what would become the most devastating betrayal of my life. The foundation was being carefully laid for a betrayal so profound it would destroy not just my marriage, but my relationship with my entire family and my faith in the people I loved most. 3 years into our marriage, Michael and I were finally in a place where we felt ready to start a family. We had saved enough money for a down payment on a house, Michael had received a promotion at his accounting firm, and my career as a graphic designer was taking off. Everything seemed to be falling into place for the life we had always dreamed of building together. It was around this time that Emma's life began to fall apart in spectacular fashion. She had dropped out of college twice, couldn't hold down a job for more than a few months, and had a string of failed relationships that always ended in dramatic breakups. Our parents, who had spent years enabling her behavior, were finally starting to express frustration with her lack of direction. Emma's response to their disappointment was to become even more reckless and attention-seeking. She started showing up at family gatherings with increasingly inappropriate boyfriends, stayed out all night without calling, and began asking our parents for money more frequently. The golden child was tarnishing, and she didn't know how to handle not being the center of positive attention anymore. This was when Emma decided she needed a change of scenery. She called me one evening, sobbing about how unfair our parents were being and how she needed some space to figure out her life. She asked if she could come stay with Michael and me for just a few weeks while she got back on her feet. Against my better judgment, and despite Michael's obvious hesitation, I agreed. I told myself I was being a good sister. Emma seemed genuinely remorseful about her past behavior and spoke about wanting to repair our relationship. She promised she would help around the house, look for a job immediately, and respect our space and privacy. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe this crisis would finally bring us closer together as sisters. Emma arrived with 2 suitcases and a sob story about her latest boyfriend cheating on her with her best friend. She threw herself into Michael's arms when he helped bring in her luggage, crying about how grateful she was to have family who cared about her. I felt a familiar twist in my stomach watching the interaction, but I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was being paranoid. The first week went surprisingly well. Emma was helpful around the house, cooked dinner a few times, and seemed genuinely committed to finding a job. She and Michael got along well, bonding over their shared love of old movies and board games. I was actually starting to enjoy having her around. It felt like we were finally developing the sisterly relationship I had always wanted. But by the second week, the cracks began to show. Emma's job search became increasingly half-hearted. She would sleep until noon, spend the afternoon watching TV or browsing social media, and then claim she had been networking or researching opportunities. When I gently suggested she might want to expand her search or consider temporary work, she would become defensive and remind me that I had promised she could take her time. More concerning were the small boundary violations that began to occur. I would come home to find Emma wearing my clothes, which she would laugh off as just borrowing. She started using my expensive skincare products and makeup without asking. When I confronted her about it, she acted hurt and confused, saying she thought we were close enough now that sharing wasn't a big deal. Emma also began inserting herself into my relationship with Michael in subtle but persistent ways. She would suggest activities for the 3 of us to do together, always positioning herself as the fun, spontaneous one, while I was cast as the responsible, uptight wife who didn't know how to relax. She started staying up late to watch movies with Michael after I went to bed, claiming she was a night owl and didn't want to disturb my sleep. I began to notice changes in Michael's behavior too. He seemed more distant and distracted, often lost in thought during our conversations. When I asked if everything was okay, he would assure me it was just work stress. But I could feel something shifting in our relationship, a subtle cooling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The few weeks stretched into a month, then 2 months. Every time I brought up Emma's departure date, she would have a new crisis or excuse. She had just started seeing someone new and wanted to see where it went. She had a promising job interview next week. She was having problems with her car and needed time to save money for repairs. There was always something preventing her from leaving. Michael stopped pushing back on Emma's extended stay, which surprised me. Initially, he had been the one setting gentle but firm boundaries about the temporary nature of her visit. But as the weeks wore on, he seemed to accept her presence as a new normal. When I expressed frustration about the situation, he would suggest that maybe she really did need our help, and we should be patient. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. Emma had a way of making me feel like I was being unreasonable whenever I tried to assert any boundaries. She would apologize profusely for any infraction, but the behavior would continue. She painted me as the uptight sister who couldn't relax and have fun, while she was just trying to bring some joy and spontaneity into our lives. The breaking point came during a dinner party Michael and I were hosting for his colleagues. Emma had promised to make herself scarce for the evening, understanding that this was an important professional event for us. Instead, she appeared in a stunning dress that I had been saving for the occasion, claiming she had nothing appropriate to wear and hoped I wouldn't mind. She proceeded to charm everyone at the party, telling amusing stories and drawing all the attention to herself. Michael's boss spent most of the evening talking to Emma instead of discussing Michael's upcoming project. When one of Michael's female colleagues complimented my dress, Emma laughed and said, "Oh, this old thing? I just threw it on. My sister has such classic taste. Sometimes I borrow her clothes when I want to look more mature." I spent the entire evening feeling invisible and upstaged in my own home. Watching Emma effortlessly charm my husband's colleagues while wearing my dress felt like a nightmare replay of our childhood dynamics. After everyone left, I confronted her about taking the dress and monopolizing the conversation at an event that was supposed to be about supporting Michael's career. Emma's response was to burst into tears and accuse me of being jealous and unsupportive. She claimed she was just trying to help make the party more fun and interesting, and she couldn't help it if people enjoyed talking to her. She made me feel like I was being petty and cruel for being upset about the dress and her behavior. Michael's response to the confrontation was what really shook me. Instead of supporting me, he suggested that maybe I was overreacting, and that Emma had actually helped make the party more lively and engaging. He said his colleagues had all commented on how fun and interesting my sister was, as if that somehow made her behavior acceptable. That night, lying in bed next to my husband, who seemed like a stranger, I realized that Emma had once again managed to make me the villain in my own story. She had turned what should have been my supportive husband against me, making me question my own perceptions and reactions. The gaslighting was so subtle and expertly done that even I was beginning to doubt whether my concerns were valid. I had no idea that this was all part of a much larger plan, and that the worst was yet to come. After the dinner party incident, I decided I needed to have a serious conversation with Michael about Emma's extended stay. I had been patient for 3 months, but her behavior was becoming increasingly problematic, and I felt like she was deliberately trying to create tension between us. I chose a quiet Saturday morning when Emma was still sleeping, hoping Michael and I could have an honest discussion about setting a firm departure date. Michael's reaction caught me completely off guard. Instead of the understanding partner I expected, he became defensive and almost hostile. He accused me of being jealous of Emma's personality and suggested that maybe I was threatened by having another woman in the house who was more social and outgoing than I was. His words stung deeply because they echoed every insecurity Emma had planted in my mind over the years. "She's your sister," Michael said, his tone colder than I'd ever heard it before. "She's going through a rough time, and all you can think about is getting rid of her. Maybe you need to examine why you're so threatened by your own family." The way he said "your own family" made it sound like an accusation, as if there was something fundamentally wrong with me for not wanting to be Emma's eternal caretaker. I tried to explain that it wasn't about jealousy. It was about boundaries and the fact that our temporary arrangement had become indefinite without any discussion. I reminded him that we had originally agreed she could stay for a few weeks, and it had now been months with no end in sight. But Michael dismissed my concerns, saying I was being calculating and cold towards someone who needed our help. The conversation ended with Michael storming out to go for a drive, leaving me sitting alone in my kitchen, questioning everything I thought I knew about my husband and my marriage. It was as if Emma had somehow rewired his brain, turning him against me using the same tactics she had perfected with our parents years earlier. That afternoon, while Michael was still out, Emma emerged from her room, looking perfectly put together, despite claiming to have just woken up. She seemed to sense that something had happened and asked if everything was okay with a concern that felt performative rather than genuine. When I didn't respond immediately, she launched into a monologue about how grateful she was for our hospitality and how she hoped she wasn't causing any problems between us. "I would just die if I thought I was coming between you and Michael," she said, her eyes wide with manufactured innocence. "You two are so perfect together. I've been telling all my friends about what an amazing marriage you have." But there was something in her tone, a slight emphasis on certain words, that made the compliment feel more like a threat. Over the following weeks, the dynamics in our house shifted dramatically. Emma became bolder in her manipulations, creating situations that consistently painted me as the unreasonable one. She would offer to cook elaborate dinners, then conveniently run out of time, leaving me to either order takeout or cook while she and Michael relaxed with drinks. When I expressed frustration, I was told I was being ungrateful for her efforts. She started having loud phone conversations about her dating life, discussing intimate details that made everyone uncomfortable, then acting surprised when I asked her to keep such conversations private. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were so conservative," she would say, making me feel like a prudish older sister who couldn't handle normal adult conversations. The most insidious part was how she began to position herself as Michael's confidant. She would ask him about work stress, listen sympathetically to his concerns, and offer advice about office politics and career decisions. Meanwhile, she would subtly criticize my responses to his problems, suggesting that I didn't really understand the pressures he was under, or that I was too focused on my own career to be supportive. I watched helplessly as my husband began turning to my sister for emotional support that he used to seek from me. Emma had a way of making every conversation about Michael's needs and feelings, while painting me as self-absorbed and unsympathetic. She would make comments like, "I don't think she realizes how hard you work for this family," or, "Some people just aren't naturally nurturing, but that doesn't mean they don't care in their own way." My attempts to address these issues with Michael were met with increasing resistance. He would accuse me of being paranoid or jealous, suggesting that I was imagining problems that didn't exist. "Emma thinks the world of you," he would say. "She's constantly telling me how lucky I am to have such a successful wife. You're projecting your childhood issues onto her." The gaslighting was so expertly done that I began to doubt my own perceptions. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe my history with Emma was making me overreact to normal sibling interactions. Maybe I really was too focused on my career and not supportive enough of my husband. Emma had found every one of my insecurities and was using them against me with surgical precision. Things escalated when Emma announced she had finally found a job, part-time retail work at a boutique downtown. I was relieved, thinking this meant she would finally be moving out and regaining her independence. Instead, she used the job as an excuse to stay longer, saying she needed time to save money for a deposit on an apartment and that the pay wasn't enough to support herself immediately. More troubling was that her work schedule seemed to perfectly align with mine. She worked evenings and weekends, which meant she was home alone with Michael during the day while I was at my office. She would casually mention things they had done together, watching movies, going grocery shopping, fixing things around the house, as if these domestic activities were perfectly normal between a man and his sister-in-law. I started coming home to find evidence of their shared time together. 2 coffee cups in the sink, takeout containers from restaurants I didn't recognize, Michael's favorite snacks that I hadn't bought. When I asked about these things, I was told they were just being efficient and helpful, running errands together since they were both free during the day. The final straw came when I discovered that Emma had been using our shared computer to research apartments in our neighborhood, rather than looking for her own place. When I confronted her about it, she claimed she wanted to stay close to family and that she thought I would be happy to have her nearby. The idea of Emma living permanently in our neighborhood, continuing to insert herself into our lives indefinitely, filled me with dread. That night, I tried one more time to have a rational conversation with Michael about setting boundaries with Emma. I explained that I felt like we were enabling her dependence and that she needed to learn to take care of herself. I suggested we give her a firm move-out date and stick to it, offering to help her find an affordable place elsewhere in the city. Michael's response was to explode in anger unlike anything I had ever seen from him. He accused me of being heartless toward my own sister and suggested that maybe I was the problem in our marriage. "Emma's right," he said, and those words hit me like a physical blow. She said, "You've always been jealous of her, and I'm starting to see it. You can't stand that someone else might need attention or support. The fact that he was now quoting Emma's analysis of my character in an argument with his wife was a betrayal that cut deeper than anything else. I realized that my sister had successfully turned my husband against me, using the same manipulation tactics that had worked on our parents for years. The difference was that this time, she wasn't just competing for attention. She was systematically destroying my marriage from the inside. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Michael slept soundly beside me, and I knew with horrible certainty that something was deeply wrong. But I had no idea just how wrong things had already become, or that the worst betrayal was still to come. The discovery happened on a Thursday afternoon in the most mundane way possible. I had forgotten my laptop charger at home and decided to duck out of work early to grab it. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Emma's car wasn't there, which was unusual since she didn't work on Thursdays. Michael's car was in the garage as expected. He had been working from home more frequently lately, claiming he was more productive without office distractions. I used my key quietly, not wanting to startle Michael if he was on an important call. The house felt strangely quiet as I stepped inside. I called out a soft hello, but got no response. Assuming Michael was in his office with headphones on, I headed toward our bedroom to get the charger. The sounds hit me before I reached the hallway. Low voices, unmistakably intimate, coming from our bedroom. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was hearing. I stood frozen in our living room, listening to my husband's voice, saying things I had longed to hear him say to me but hadn't in months. My feet moved without conscious thought, carrying me down the hallway towards sounds that would destroy my world. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I saw them. My husband of 5 years and my sister, tangled together in the bed I shared with him every night, completely lost in each other. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that my body went into shock. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. I watched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds as my sister, the woman I had welcomed into my home out of love and concern, made love to my husband with a passion and intensity that I hadn't seen between us in months. But it was Emma's face that truly broke me. There was no guilt, no conflict, no remorse. She looked triumphant. Even in the throes of passion, there was something calculating in her expression, as if she was savoring not just the physical intimacy, but the victory of having taken something that belonged to me. It was the same look she had worn as a child when she successfully got me in trouble, pure, satisfied malice. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control them. I made it to my car before the full weight of what I had seen crashed over me. 5 years of marriage, months of manipulation, and a lifetime of sibling rivalry had led to this moment. Emma hadn't just succeeded in turning my husband against me, she had stolen him completely. The drive back to my office was a blur. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a recent development. The way they were together, the comfort and familiarity in their intimacy, told me this had been going on for weeks, possibly months. Every late-night movie, every shared errand, every moment I had felt excluded from my own marriage, it had all been leading to this. I realized that Emma's extended stay had never been about getting back on her feet. It had been a calculated campaign to destroy my marriage and steal my husband. She had studied our relationship, identified our weak points, and systematically exploited them, while positioning herself as the perfect alternative to everything I lacked. The cruelest part was how she had made me complicit in my own destruction. Every time I had expressed concern about her behavior, I had been painted as the jealous, unsupportive sister. Every boundary I tried to set had been twisted into evidence of my coldness and lack of compassion. She had used my own kindness and family loyalty against me, turning my desire to help her into the weapon that would destroy my marriage. I couldn't go home that night. I couldn't face them. couldn't pretend I didn't know what I had seen. Instead, I checked into a hotel and tried to figure out what to do next. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, and broken in a way that went deeper than just discovering infidelity. This was the culmination of a lifetime of psychological warfare, and I had finally lost the war. One didn't even know I was fighting. My phone buzzed with texts from Michael wondering where I was, claiming to be worried about me. The casual normalcy of his messages, sent just hours after I had seen him betraying everything we had built together, made me physically sick. How long had he been living this double life? How long had they been laughing about my obliviousness? Vasent Jessica. As I sat in that sterile hotel room, I realized that Emma had achieved the ultimate victory. She hadn't just taken my husband, she had made me doubt everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and family. The foundation of my entire adult life had been built on quicksand, carefully constructed by the two people I had trusted most. But as the shock began to wear off, something else started to take its place. For the first time in my life, I was seeing Emma's manipulation clearly, without the fog of family obligation or self-doubt. The woman who had destroyed my science project, who had spent years undermining my relationships and self-esteem, who had systematically dismantled my marriage from the inside, she had finally overplayed her hand. The golden child had won again, but this time, I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of victory it really was. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting them immediately, I was going to document everything, gather evidence, and prepare for the battle of my life. Emma had spent years playing chess while I was playing checkers, but the game wasn't over yet. Little did I know that within weeks, Emma would face consequences that even her masterful manipulation couldn't charm her way out of. And I would finally get to watch the golden child's world crumble, just as completely as she had destroyed mine. I spent 3 days in that hotel room, and they were the most clarifying 72 hours of my life. For years, I had been reactive, responding to Emma's provocations, defending myself against her manipulations, trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I was lacking. But now, with the full scope of her betrayal laid bare, I finally understood that I needed to stop playing defense and start playing offense. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator. If Emma and Michael thought they were being clever, I was going to find out exactly how long this had been going on and document everything. I also made an appointment with the best divorce attorney in the city, a woman whose reputation for protecting her clients' interests was legendary. If this was going to be a war, I was going to arm myself properly. During those 3 days, Michael's calls and texts became increasingly frantic. He went from casual, "Where are you?" messages to accusations that I was being dramatic and immature. By the 3rd day, he was threatening to call the police to report me missing. The manipulation was so transparent now that I almost laughed. He was using the same tactics Emma had perfected, making me the villain for having a reasonable reaction to their betrayal. Emma, interestingly, didn't contact me at all. That told me everything I needed to know about how confident she was in her victory. She probably thought I would slink back home, tail between my legs, and accept this new reality where she got to have my husband while I played the role of the bitter, jealous sister. She had no idea that I was done being the victim in her story. When I finally returned home on Friday evening, they were sitting together on the couch watching a movie, not even trying to hide their intimacy anymore. Michael jumped up when I walked in, immediately going into defensive mode, demanding to know where I had been and accusing me of worrying him sick. Emma just smiled at me with that familiar, satisfied expression, as if daring me to say something. "I've been thinking," I said calmly, setting down my purse. "And you're right, Michael, Emma has been here long enough to really become part of the family." The confusion on both their faces was almost comical. They had been prepared for tears, accusations, or dramatic confrontations. They weren't prepared for calm acceptance. In fact, I continued, I think it's time we told our parents about how close you two have become. They'll be so interested to hear about this new development in our family dynamic. The color drained from Emma's face. For the first time since childhood, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Our parents might have favored her, but they were still traditional people, with strong opinions about marriage and family loyalty. They would be horrified by what she had done, and even their golden child couldn't charm her way out of adultery and betrayal. Michael started stammering about how there was nothing to tell our parents, that I was misunderstanding the situation. But Emma was smarter. She knew I had seen them, and she knew that her usual manipulations wouldn't work anymore. The jig was up, and she could see in my eyes that I was done playing her games. "We need to talk," Michael said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Oh, we'll talk," I replied, "tomorrow, with my attorney present. I think it's time we discuss the future of our marriage properly." That night, I slept in the guest room while listening to them have hushed, urgent conversations in what used to be our bedroom. I could hear Emma's voice getting higher and more frantic as the reality of her situation began to sink in. She had won my husband, but she was about to lose everything else. The next few weeks were a masterclass in how quickly someone's carefully constructed world can crumble. The private investigator's report was even more damning than I had expected. He had evidence of their affair going back 4 months, almost from the moment Emma had moved in. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even photos of them together when they thought I was safely at work. More importantly, he had discovered that Emma's job at the boutique was largely fictional. She worked maybe 10 hours a week, and her manager confirmed that she spent most of her time on personal calls and was constantly asking to leave early. The story about saving money for an apartment was just another lie. She had been living off Michael's generosity while contributing virtually nothing to the household. But the real bombshell came when I decided to call our parents. I had been dreading this conversation, knowing how they would react to their golden child's downfall. But I underestimated just how explosive the revelation would be. "What do you mean she's having an affair with Michael?" Our mother's voice was so shrill I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "That's impossible. Emma would never do something like that." When I calmly explained what I had discovered and offered to show them the evidence, the line went silent for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, our father's voice came on, and he sounded older than I had ever heard him. "We'll be there tomorrow," he said simply. Emma's face when our parents walked into the house was something I will treasure forever. She tried to turn on the charm, to paint me as the unstable sister who was making wild accusations, but our father cut her off with a look that could have frozen hell. "Is it true?" he asked simply. For the first time in her life, Emma couldn't lie her way out of a situation. The evidence was too overwhelming, and even she wasn't brazen enough to deny it to our father's face. She broke down in tears, claiming it just happened, that she never meant for it to go this far, that she was sorry. But our parents weren't buying it anymore. The spell was finally broken. They saw her for what she really was. Not the charming, misunderstood daughter who needed their protection, but a manipulative woman who had destroyed her sister's marriage without a shred of remorse. "Pack your things," our mother said, her voice colder than I had ever heard it. "You're not welcome in this house anymore." Michael tried to defend Emma, tried to take responsibility and claim it was all his fault, but our parents weren't interested in his explanations. They had spent years enabling Emma's behavior, and they were finally seeing the consequences of their favoritism. "You both made your choice," our father said. "Now you'll live with it, but don't expect any support from this family." As Emma packed her belongings, crying and pleading for forgiveness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 30 years. I felt like my parents finally saw me as the daughter who had been wronged, not the problem child who caused drama. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Michael tried to fight for half of everything, But the evidence of his adultery and the fact that he had been spending marital assets on his affair with Emma worked heavily in my favor. Emma, meanwhile, discovered that being the other woman wasn't nearly as glamorous when you couldn't fall back on your parents' financial support. Within 2 months, they had both moved into a tiny apartment across town. Michael's reputation at work suffered when word got out about the affair, and Emma found herself completely cut off from the family support system that had enabled her entire adult life. But the real justice was still to come, and it would arrive in a way that none of us, especially Emma, could have predicted. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was finally starting to rebuild my life. I had moved into a beautiful apartment downtown, thrown myself into my graphic design business, and was actually dating again, something I never thought I'd be ready for so soon. For the first time since childhood, I felt genuinely happy and free from Emma's toxic influence. My parents and I had developed a relationship that was healthier than anything we'd ever had. They had been horrified by what Emma had done and were making genuine efforts to understand how their favoritism had contributed to the situation. It was painful but healing work, and I was cautiously optimistic about our future together as a family. Emma and Michael, meanwhile, had seemingly disappeared from our lives entirely. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Michael's career had taken a significant hit. His firm had quietly pushed him toward resignation after the affair became office gossip, and he was struggling to find comparable employment. Emma, predictably, was bouncing between part-time jobs and had apparently burned through her savings. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, just a sense of relief that the chapter of my life they had dominated was finally closed. I was learning what it felt like to live without constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next manipulation or betrayal. That peace shattered on a Tuesday morning when Emma showed up at my apartment building. I was heading out for a client meeting when I saw her sitting on the steps, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman who had destroyed my marriage. Her hair was unwashed, she'd clearly been crying, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "We need to talk," she said, standing up as I approached. Her voice was different, too, smaller, more desperate than I'd ever heard it. "I don't think we have anything to discuss," I replied, moving to walk around her, but she grabbed my arm, and I was shocked by how thin she'd become. "Please," she begged, and the words sounded foreign coming from her mouth. "I'm pregnant." Those 2 words hit me like a physical blow. Of all the ways I had imagined this story might continue, Emma carrying Michael's child had never occurred to me. The ultimate irony wasn't lost on me. She had destroyed my marriage to steal my husband, and now she was going to have the family I had always wanted with him. "Congratulations," I said coldly, trying to pull away from her grip. "I'm sure you and Michael are very happy." Emma's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Michael? He left me the moment I told him. Packed his stuff and moved back in with his parents. Said he wasn't ready to be a father, and that this wasn't his problem to deal with." The information took a moment to process. Michael, the man who had claimed to love Emma enough to destroy his marriage, had abandoned her the moment their affair had real consequences. It was almost too perfect, except for the fact that an innocent child was now involved. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Whatever Emma had done to me, no woman deserved to face pregnancy alone after being abandoned by the father. But I still don't see what this has to do with me. Emma's composure finally cracked completely. She broke down sobbing on the steps of my apartment building, drawing stares from passing neighbors. "I have nowhere else to go," she cried. "Mom and Dad won't even take my calls. I can't afford the rent on our apartment by myself, and I can barely keep up with my bills. I don't know what to do." Looking at her crumpled form, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of me, the part that had been hurt and betrayed so deeply, wanted to walk away and let her figure it out on her own. She had made her choices. and now she could live with the consequences. But another part of me, the part that had been raised to believe family was everything, felt sick at the thought of turning my back on my pregnant sister, no matter what she had done. "You have options," I said carefully. "There are social services, support programs for single mothers." "You don't understand," Emma interrupted. "I can't do this alone. I never learned how to take care of myself. Mom and Dad always handled everything, and then Michael was taking care of the bills, and now I don't even know how to apply for assistance or find affordable housing or any of it." The admission was startling in its honesty. Emma was essentially confessing that at 28 years old, she was completely helpless without someone else taking care of her. All those years of being the golden child had left her utterly unprepared for the real world, and now she was facing the biggest challenge of her life with no support system. "I made a terrible mistake," she continued, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I know what I did to you was unforgivable. I destroyed your marriage, I betrayed your trust, I was horrible to you our entire lives. But I'm desperate, I don't have anyone else." For 30 years, I had waited for Emma to acknowledge what she had done to me, to admit that her treatment of me had been deliberate and cruel, to show even a hint of genuine remorse for the pain she had caused. And now, when she was at her lowest point, facing the consequences of her actions, she was finally saying the words I had longed to hear. But they felt hollow. Was she really sorry for what she had done? Or was she just sorry that it had all caught up with her? Was this genuine remorse? Or just another manipulation? A desperate attempt to get me to rescue her from the mess she had created? "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said. Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve, a gesture so unlike her usual polished self that it was almost jarring. "I don't know. Maybe I could stay with you for a while? Just until I figure things out. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'll do anything. I'll clean, I'll cook, I'll stay out of your way. I just need somewhere safe to have this baby." The request was so audacious that I almost laughed. After everything she had done, after stealing my husband, destroying my marriage, and making my life hell for 3 decades, she wanted me to take her in and support her through her pregnancy. The woman who had always taken everything from me was now asking me to give her even more. "You're unbelievable," I said, shaking my head. "You destroy my marriage, break up our family, and now you want me to take care of you and your baby? The baby you're having with my ex-husband." "I know how it sounds," Emma said desperately, "but you're the only person who might understand. You know what it's like, to be the one everyone expects to be responsible, to take care of things. I never had to learn those skills, because I always had someone else to do it for me. But you're strong, you're independent, you know how to handle things. I need you to teach me." It was perhaps the most manipulative thing she had ever said to me, and that was saying something. She was trying to frame her request as some kind of mentorship opportunity, as if helping her would somehow be good for me too. She was attempting to turn her greatest weakness, her complete inability to function as an adult, into something that would appeal to my sense of responsibility and superiority. But for the first time in my life, I could see the manipulation clearly as it was happening. I could see how she was trying to play on my emotions, how she was attempting to make me feel guilty for not helping her, how she was positioning herself as the victim who deserved my compassion. The old me, the me who had spent 30 years trying to earn love and approval from people who had already decided I wasn't worth it, might have fallen for it. Might have convinced herself that helping Emma was the right thing to do, that family obligations trumped personal boundaries, that being the bigger person meant sacrificing myself for someone who had never shown me the same consideration. But I wasn't that person anymore. Emma had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life by finally showing me exactly who she was and exactly what our relationship had always been. She had freed me from the illusion that we were sisters who loved each other despite our differences. We weren't sisters. We were a predator and her prey, and I was done being prey. "No," I said simply. Emma stared at me as if she couldn't process what she had heard. "What?" "No," I repeated. "I will not help you. I will not take you in. I will not support you. I will not teach you how to be an adult. And I will not enable your helplessness any longer. You made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences." The look on Emma's face was one I had never seen before. Genuine shock that someone was saying no to her, that her manipulation wasn't working, that she couldn't charm or guilt her way out of this situation. But I'm pregnant," she stammered, as if that changed everything. "Yes, you are," I agreed, "with the child of the man you stole from me. And now, you're both learning what happens when you build your happiness on someone else's destruction." As I walked away from my sister, possibly for the last time, I felt something I had never experienced before. I felt free. 1 year later, I was sitting in my therapist's office, talking about something I never thought I'd be discussing: my engagement to David, a kind, stable man who loved me for exactly who I was. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had found real love only after I stopped trying to earn it from people who were never going to give it freely. "How does it feel," Dr. Martinez asked, "to be planning a wedding without your sister involved?" It was a question that would have devastated me 2 years ago. The idea of getting married without Emma there, without any family drama or competition for attention, would have felt empty and wrong. But now it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Peaceful," I said honestly. "For the first time in my life, my big day is actually going to be about me and David, not about managing Emma's jealousy or trying to prevent her from stealing the spotlight." Dr. Martinez smiled. "That's significant progress from where you were when we started these sessions." She was right. When I had first started therapy 8 months ago, I was consumed with guilt about turning Emma away. Despite everything she had done to me, I had been raised to believe that family came first, that forgiveness was always the right choice, that being the bigger person meant sacrificing your own well-being for others. It had taken months of work to understand that boundaries weren't selfish. They were necessary. That forgiveness didn't require putting yourself back in harm's way. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their destructive behavior, even if they never thank you for it. "Have you heard anything about how she's doing?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. I had, though not directly. Emma had given birth to a daughter 6 months ago. Through mutual acquaintances and social media posts I occasionally glimpsed, I knew she was struggling as a single mother, working multiple part-time jobs, and living in a small apartment across town. Michael had never stepped up to help, despite court-ordered child support that he rarely paid on time. Our parents had eventually begun speaking to Emma again. Their guilt over cutting her off during her pregnancy had been stronger than their disappointment in her actions. But their relationship with her was different now, more conditional and boundaried than it had ever been. They helped with the baby occasionally, but they no longer rushed to solve all of Emma's problems for her. "I feel sorry for her," I said, and I meant it. Not sorry enough to sacrifice my peace for her again, but I do feel sorry for her. She's finally facing the real world, without anyone to shield her from the consequences of her actions, and she's learning how hard life can be when you have to actually take responsibility for yourself. Dr. Martinez nodded. "That's very mature. You can have compassion for someone while still maintaining healthy boundaries." The truth was, I had found a kind of peace with the whole situation. Emma was no longer my responsibility, my problem, or my concern. She was simply a person I used to know who had made choices that led her to where she was now. I wished her no harm, but I also wasn't going to sacrifice my hard-won happiness to rescue her from problems she had created for herself. My relationship with our parents had continued to improve. They had been horrified when they learned the full extent of Emma's manipulation over the years, and they were making genuine efforts to understand how their favoritism had damaged both of their daughters. It was painful work, but it was healing too. I spent 30 years trying to earn love from people who had already decided I wasn't worth their full attention, I told Dr. Martinez. I'm not willing to spend another 30 years making the same mistake. The wedding planning had been a revelation. Without Emma's drama to manage, without having to worry about her upstaging me or creating scenes or making everything about her, I was actually enjoying the process. David's family had welcomed me with open arms, treating me like the daughter they'd always wanted, rather than the consolation prize they'd settled for. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "I got a message from Emma yesterday." Dr. Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" I read the message aloud. "I heard about your engagement. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I was hoping we could talk. I've been thinking a lot about our childhood and the mistakes I made. I want to try to make things right between us. My daughter deserves to know her aunt, and maybe we could find a way to be a family again." It was classic Emma. The emotional manipulation disguised as personal growth, the use of her innocent child as leverage, the assumption that I would eventually come around if she just found the right approach. But what struck me most was how transparent it all seemed now. A year ago, this message might have sent me spiraling with guilt and self-doubt. Now it just made me sad for her. "How did that make you feel?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Nothing," I said, surprised by my own response. I felt nothing. No anger, no guilt, no temptation to respond. It was like getting a spam email from someone trying to sell me something I don't need. And it was true. The message that Emma thought would pull at my heartstrings had simply bounced off the boundaries I had finally learned to build. I wasn't angry at her for trying. It was the only strategy she knew. But I also wasn't going to reward the attempt by engaging with it. "What did you do with the message?" "I deleted it," I said. "I didn't block her number. I'm not afraid of her anymore." But I also didn't respond. There's nothing to say. We're not going to be sisters again, and that's okay. Some relationships can't be repaired, and some people can't change, and that's not my responsibility to fix. Dr. Martinez smiled. "That sounds like someone who has learned to put her own well-being first." As I left therapy that day and headed home to David, I reflected on how much my life had changed. I had a career I loved, a partner who cherished me, friends who respected me, and parents who were finally seeing me clearly. Most importantly, I had learned to see myself clearly too. The woman who had spent decades trying to earn love from people who were determined to withhold it was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and wasn't willing to negotiate it away for the illusion of family harmony. Emma would probably continue trying to manipulate her way back into my life for years to come. She would use her daughter, our parents, mutual friends, and any other leverage she could find. But it wouldn't work anymore, because I had finally learned the most important lesson of my life. You can't change people who don't want to change, but you can change how you respond to them. 3 months later, David and I had the wedding of our dreams. Intimate, joyful, and completely drama-free. Our parents attended and seemed genuinely happy for us. Emma was not invited, and for the first time in my life, her absence felt like a gift rather than a loss. As David and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, surrounded by people who truly loved and supported us, I felt something I had never experienced before. Complete and total peace with who I was and the choices I had made. I had finally learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away, and the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to be happy without permission from people who were never going to give it anyway. Emma had spent our entire lives trying to make me smaller so she could feel bigger, but in the end, her betrayal had done the opposite. It had shown me exactly how much strength I had been hiding, even from myself. The golden child had finally lost the war she didn't realize she was fighting, and I had won something much more valuable than her approval, I had won my freedom.